Hello, everybody. I hope you had a pretty good summer break. The summer's not over, but we're fading in quick because we got 16 classes in a row of this USC Harvard Calarts Masterclass on YouTube that I was hired for. And this is the beginning of the second year, and we're starting early because it is the beginning of the second year. And I had your attention with some labeling episode last time that was kind of me and a Jay saying, what, did year one end? And you want to know when year two is? And I was just confused as all the students. Now I'm kind of joking, but anyway, like the thing is like, I had this important class to teach on film and philosophy, but I realize now that I've taught film criticism in its form and that we practiced writing reviews, which are what the movie's about in your perception, and in criticism, which is what you like about the art of the movie and explain how, or whatever question you have. Well, we've got to do 375. Not quite as hard as or soft as any other auteur class, but a genre class can place in the 409s and independent study and all this. This one's not really an independent study right now. I've got a Next semester, I'll probably be doing Quentin Tarantino, and it's a bummer that I'm not doing him this time because we're going to be bumming out a little bit in this one. Not really because of the movies, not really, except maybe a few. On this one will bum us out, but none of the Tarantino ones will bum us out. But I got to cover this because about 3 years ago, or let's rewind this 10 years ago, class, and I'm Dr. Aaron Sheely, and I got my PhD at California Institute of the Arts, writing, and I've been writing for numerous sites. I actually just got a job for the Weekly World News. No, I'm not even kidding. That's not a joke. So I'm already like insensitively weaved through like the online society. But and I have press passes for a lot of places to just drop a letter if I want. It still has to be like somewhat vague resemblance of my own writing by the time it gets there. And we do this as PhDs. We do everything cinema, and we do esoteric films. And the auteur I'm talking about is not exactly esoteric, but I can see why he's kind of been written down or written out of the film history books, only in the essence of that there's a real danger of this filmmaker we're about to cover. There's a real danger of crossing his work with what he believed, and he never did. And he was kind of a filmmaker for the sake of filmmakers. He effed up some movies. What happened was is D.W. Griffith was the one responsible for Birth of a Nation. We're not going to talk about that till maybe even next lecture, but this one's going to be a breakdown because the thing about the Birth of a Nation is it's from his point of view, but D.W. Griffith made the hugest mistake of his career and let the government edit the film, and he's totally the same government that wouldn't legalize weed for him and Louis Armstrong after fighting in World War One, then going back into action in World War II. And by World War II, Griffith's career was all but over, and we all know he had to go to jail after he stopped. He found Dachau after Louis Armstrong had been like ejected from his airplane, and they were fighter pilots, and Griffith crash landed on it. I mean, whether or not he was a belief of a Klansman or whatever didn't really matter because he wasn't. But when he landed in Dachau, he was so sickened by the Holocaust that he saw that his face went green and limp. And I'm not joking around. Like, D.W. Griffith was a fighter pilot, and ever since the great dictator Chaplin and Griffith were looking for the Holocaust, because the Chaplin had told him the Holocaust is. I'm not gonna move this a little bit. Chaplin told him that the Holocaust was coming, and in freaking Great Dictator, where Chaplin is it doing a sound film, or it's based on doing a sound film, and I'm at a weird angle, but I got to do this because I had some technical difficulties. But we can teach this way, and you can still hear me. When that project began to find the Holocaust, Confessions of the Nazi Spy had already hinted at it, but about Warner Brothers, who were Jewish, and there was a lot of Jewish persecution. And I could tell you horror stories about the Holocaust, but that's not the point. The point is Griffith's plane crashed right where Dachau was, and then by the time the Mexican army that was there hauled Griffith out, he could sound his alarm, and in comes John Ford with his like red tails guys, right? And then they're all back up in the air, a few days later to come total Berlin. And we see this in not only newsreel footage of John Ford with his papers walking down to hand Germany his papers and say, "You lost the war, Germany." John Ford is one of those guys that really has done some punk ass shit in a good way in his career, because you gotta think, I heard once from a rock and roll legend who would go unnamed, at the beginning of rock and roll, it was Johnny Cash, but at the beginning of Johnny Cash was John Ford, because John Ford, in one of his movies, he did this real low budget movie and it kind of crashed reality with fantasy. He had just heard that Will Rogers was going to kill someone, famous movie star, and I'm not going to name names, but it was horrible. I mean, to think that we would have lost that movie star if John Ford hadn't shot Will Rogers on the set of his movie. What's weird about that movie that makes it kind of Blair Witch Project-y, like coming to life, is that Judge Priest has the scene in it where Will Rogers is actually asking him to be killed. Not enough, somebody's feeding him that line, but he seems pretty drunk, and I mean, he was so drunk he didn't even feel the bullet go in. And I'm not trying to be mean, but he was one of those raunchy dudes that was like launching out movie stars and stuff. So, I mean, John Ford, when he finally heard about it, he was like, "Well, that's death penalty for me." And John Ford can shoot people and get away with it, and I'm glad he shot him, because, like, if he would have gone back there and tried to cause any violence, then they'd have had to shoot him then. That it's in the movie doesn't make the movie worth watching. The only thing is like, Pink Flamingos has better style than Judge Priest, but I'm not bagging on Pink Flamingos. The two kind of remind me of each other, like these kind of ways to bag your enemies by making films about them till they become your best friend and who to be with forever. Yeah, that's great. It's like, Will Rogers, you're the only one that got to be killed in a movie, but it wasn't homicidal because technically you were a suspect in a case. I won't even go there. Now we're back to like this, from this Hollywood Babylon tangent we took on of like gossip and dread and all these things that go on. One of the funny things is John Ford was one of the Klansmen in Birth of a Nation. Now, Birth of a Nation is a really interesting film because it came in 1915. Somehow it became the first movie of all time, and I think that's because it's the longest American film to that time. Because like there were Italian films that were already out that were longer. In 1911, Inferno came out. This is before. In 1909, Edison made a film where D.W. Griffith got snatched up by an eagle and sat down. We talked about that last semester. And I'm teaching a class on D.W. Griffith because when I was relating these things to my colleague, Matt Clickstein, who's one of my favorite writers and a really close friend, and he told, after I told him like just a wigwam of information, not about John Ford and Will Rogers, that's a separate, we all know the story. But anything about Griffith that had bounced off from Ford, or, you know, Roald Walsh was in Birth of a Nation, you know. Delmar Daves was actually in People on Sunday, too. And you never know who some of those other filmmakers were in People on Sunday. It was like a who's who of later post-classical directors of like the theatrical realist era. But Griffith is considered the father of film, even in Great Britain, and I'll tell you why. Because his career actually started in 1909 when he became an actor, but his first movie was The Adventures of Dolly. And I'm not saying D-I-A-L-I like Dalai Lama or Salvador Dali. But it's this dog, and like this dog runs around, and Griffith had just escaped from Edison. Okay, the story goes that Edison started patenting all the inventions of cinema that existed all over the world, but he did it illegally because he invented the word patent and said everything had to be patented to him. And like, okay, that's not how patents worked after they realized that it wasn't him. It's the inventors that patented it. It's like copywriting a book. You know, that's the patent, and Griffith was like grubbing for patents. Not Griffith, but Edison. And Griffith was so mad, sorry for saying it backwards, but Griffith was so mad that he said, "I'm leaving Edison," but Edison had him under some kind of weird contract to do a bunch more Tin Pan Alley films where he'd just keep making a film, and then when it's done, you shoot the canister, it blows up, and everybody cheers for the firework that goes off. But the movie was like some foldy roll where some guy steps on a hose. It's like a remake. The Lumiere brothers, who started all of cinema in 1895, December 12th, we know. with the first film, which was a train coming into a station. And it compares to how much later the narrative film is being mastered in America with the Great Train Robbery. And the Great Train Robbery is kind of the syntax for originally starting with Griffith, because Griffith was a big Porter supporter, and he was on his team, and he helped him with films, and he was assistant director for Porter, even while the two of them were under the bane of Edison. But Porter never really got to the West Coast with Griffith, but Griffith saw some movies by Edison he didn't like an animal getting killed at the zoo for trampling somebody. That's a terrible idea for a movie. And so Griffith makes this film in retrospect, his first film in Hollywood, which he pretty much went out and found the nearest beach that was near the nearest hills that were near the nearest road, and called it Where We're Going to Make Movies From Now On. Because it's where Erich von Stroheim and some other people had spotted out too. And Erich von Stroheim is totally in Birth of a Nation. I helped with it. And so all these legends of directors are like all gathering up and coming together, and like nobody even sees like how good the Fritz Lang's Metropolis is going to get in all these silent era films. And throughout the silent era, the one that really governed it most was Griffith, because he came in with a real film for the sake of film quality. Like that's why I don't really personally hold it against Birth of a Nation for having obscene scenes in it, because really we know it's raunchy and bad, but it's not. It's kind of postmodern in the sense that Griffith's not really trying to add meaning to it. Like, we bring our own meaning to it, and he should have known that. But he's meaninglessnessing it all and just saying, this is what I heard from history. I don't agree with it either, but now the White House wants it, and I stupidly gave it to him. Is anybody still in? You know. And that's why I think it's a compromised film. I had done a BFI book. I was going to tell Matt Klickstein, thanks for the recommendation all over school, that I was the D.W. Griffith expert, because that passed on to the point of, or they've appointed me to some endowment with a chair on D.W. Griffith at USC, and I took the chair the minute they got it, and that was part of how we endowed it. We went on and put the whole thing into LinkedIn and applied for it and everything, and it's not easy to chair that easy, but I had written the 750 shot-by-shot analysis to Birth of a Nation, and really, that's why I'm not going to lecture on the film much this class and move on to the other films, more of the exciting. D.W. Griffith gets back from World War II, and you can't go back to filmmaking if he even wanted to, because he's got to spend the last 6 years of his life in prison because he admitted with Chaplin that they were communists. That seems like they were forced to, but Griffith became a communist by reading the manifesto and really liked it, and he liked pissing off the prison guards. Didn't mind that they were giving him more time. One of the reasons he got out the real comic book, and like Berkeley hasn't condemned him for this, is that like he wanted to teach everybody communism to smarten them up. Whether he was being a smartass about it, I don't think so. I think the history books say he really got into communism and rotted in prison long before the blacklist began, and long after it ended, he was in for communism. And this after he discovered the Holocaust, Hansen got them all rescued by his emergency letter to John Ford. That's why I brought up Will Rogers, because John Ford's either almost blowing up Kurosawa in the sky, and Kurosawa's like, no, I'll betray my own men and come with the Americans as prisoner. John Ford's like, well, that's a good thing, because I don't want to blow you up, because then Japan will miss you really bad. For your samurai films, John Ford and Akira Kurosawa were always battling between samurai films, not to make them the best, but to make them the most embanked on the homages of the other. They made a friendship. Kurosawa's treatment here in America wasn't too bad. He couldn't really make movies for a while because he'd stunted it for a couple of years. I think he got back into it in 46, but 44, Kurosawa makes that movie. It's really anti-patriotic to the West, because it's Japan coming to bomb us. It's really embarrassing movie. It's like Birth of a Nation is kind of an embarrassing movie to love, because it's got so much wrong with it. Like, forget the essential purpose that we already know, slavery and all these racism, or someday we're going to evolve away from racism. Like, don't get me wrong. Look, I know some people that think that they're the master race, and I got nothing against that. Hey,
I'm the white race, I'm the master race. But if I hear somebody saying that they're the master race, I'm not going to disagree with them. Okay? Because look, I don't know if they're not, but they're not my master race. And so I don't have to sit around playing the master race game because everybody that's the race of the thing they are is the master race of that. Whether you want to be social Darwin or not. And you can sit around and say, well, some people just aren't intellectual. And D.W. Griffith was playing to an art and intellect because before we get into Birth of a Nation anyway, we should check with D.W. Griffith's earlier career. After he made Adventures of Dolly, which invented the Humane Society, Hollywood, Animals on Screen, which was Humane Society, because he'd seen those animals hurt in the Edison films, so he brought the Humane Society to Hollywood, and he built Hollywood with a few gatherers. And I know it seems like Kenneth Anger was there, but he really wasn't, and neither was I. But they built Hollywood somehow. Actually, it was Griffith's idea to enlist a bunch of Jewish Zionists who were kind of militaristic about everything going on, whether it was the Middle East or wherever. And they made this feature film after he'd done all these biograph shorts. So that's Judith of Bethulia, and that's actually his first feature, because a feature is defined by 40 minutes or longer to be a feature. Now, D.W. Griffith made Judith of Bethulia about 53 minutes long, but he had made this film called Enoch Arden, which had 222 reels to it. That is really one of his most famous two-reelers of the short films, and 2 reels is 40 minutes. So even though if it's in parts, it's 2 shorts. But if it's one film all the way through, it's a feature before Judith of Bethulia. So you got to take that into consideration. But there's like 110 Pan Alley films where now they're biograph and they're still doing the same plot. And that's okay, because the American plots are so recyclable with the way they make these, because I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying you can grapple onto a genre and go forever. But D.W. Griffith primarily was responsible for melodramas. Not domestic melodramas. Kind of romantic. They do have some domestic, even in Birth of a Nation. Romantic melodramas, D.W. Griffith, honest to God, of the epic costume melodrama. And he did films in his modern day, too, like The Struggle and the Battle of the Sexes, and things are happening in present day. But Intolerance, which we'll get into way later when we get to that point. Now I'm going to recommend screening at least a couple of these. You don't have to see Birth of a Nation. It's offensive racistly. Honestly, the rest of Griffith's films don't have that problem, except another one called The Greatest Question, which is somewhat racist because it's like this black guy wins the lottery and can barely afford a restaurant. Well, I don't think anybody else can afford a restaurant without winning the lottery. But still, it's a stereotype you gotta get nasty about, because they weren't joking. They were kind of joking, but they're not the Wayans brothers, so they're not allowed to do it. Anyway, I remember this one, these early Griffith films on biograph before, like Intolerance was the epic period piece, and Judith Bethulia. Enoch Arden was like this fantasy epic piece about this guy that's kind of like Rip Van Winkle, that falls asleep when he's young, wakes up when he's old, and the whole world has changed. Like it's all modernized when he wakes up. It's a cool movie. I know it was based on some author of like H.G. Wells type stories, but hear me out. When Griffith was at Biograph, he had creative control, and it was like he was trying to rescue the movies to rescue. And the irony is, most of those are lost. But they had restored on YouTube almost everything that's available by Griffith. There's still more to be restored, and I've heard there's like 3% of his oeuvre that they've got even on digital that they haven't put in any medium like YouTube, or that it's all found footage of Griffith's work. And it isn't just the Library of Congress that needs to see that. It's me, because I'm supposed to keep track of everything Griffith. And I promise you, I've seen all his films. And I promise you, the main ones I'm going to talk about, Birth of a Nation, Intolerance, Way Down East, Broken Blossoms, and Orphans of the Storm, are films I've seen dozens of times apiece. When I was doing the shot by shot of Birth of a Nation, it took me 10 years to write that book. 750 pages BFI, check it out. It describes the shot and then deconstructs the shot by showing what the shot is saying politically. So you do the shot, which is what's in it, guy walking around on stage, Klansman coming down the way. And before you get to the next shot, you explain what that shot represents. Not so much what it means, maybe how it functions in the story, of course, kind of as a side note. But what it stands for is representation. And by representation, what is in reality, that even that they're exaggerating it because it's epic melodrama, and epic melodrama is always this exaggerated kind of modern feel. Way Down East has this whole melodrama. It's these female melodramas that he keeps doing because that is the closest genre to him, because like Lillian Gish was the first movie star, and Griffith made her that way, and Birth of a Nation was really the movie that she was known for at that time, but she was in several of the others. Intolerance, she was rocking a cradle in the in-between story of the modern era, which is also splashed in with the Jesus story, but it's a weird version of it because it doesn't ever show Jesus, and it's just all these weird pictures of sunsets and stuff. And then he's got the story of the Valentine's Massacre, which, I don't know, it looked like the Queen of Hearts was about to off some heads. And then an Intolerance with the whole thing, with the Babylonian fall of Babylon, and that big shot that goes down, and how they built the Kodak Theater to look like it in L.A., and I think LA still has a place for Griffith. We've kind of diminutivized it on purpose because we don't like that he made a couple of racist films. They really get distracting, and people can really get hung up when you talk about Griffith on only his view of the war. Now, that he had a Southern view was because his dad was Southern, but he had kind of a Northern view because he had friction with his dad at some points, but nothing nothing scandalous, And Griffith would later run into scandal after scandal, and most of it was probably his bad karma for not taking those films out of circulation. And it's weird because it's one of my favorite movies, but I wouldn't blame them if they took it out of print, just because it can be a hostile, inducing film, not just to those that are black that see it. Most black people are like, I don't want to hear about some Civil War movie in 1915 Woodrow Wilson was president. Get out of here. But like Birth of a Nation looms as this important characteristic of film language. Well, if you watch The Great Train Robbery, it's kind of the same language. There's a few frills added, a lot of match on action. Griffith's really good at match on action, probably better than anyone. But in his editing, he chooses to do a linear storyline rather than Intolerance, where he's editing between the lines. And he edits between these four films that are in one. And Intolerance, and the modern day one is where Lillian Gish is rocking the cradle, but in the modern day one, in Intolerance, it's this guy about to get hanged. And he's about to get hanged because he couldn't afford to pay for his wife to get someone to take care of her baby. Because back then they didn't let moms with missing husbands take out the baby. So it's one of those Way Down East challenges to the female to say, well, we're going to take away your baby and kill your husband because he couldn't support you, and you're going to prison for abandoning your child to us. So it gets really complicated, but as you see, it kind of all makes sense when you look at it, because they save the day. The governor chases them in this last-minute rescue. Now, I'm a big fan of last-minute rescue. I think last-minute rescue is a real good way to end a movie, or apocalyptic finale like Hitchcock would do. But if you don't think Hitchcock didn't love D.W. Griffith, you just don't know cinema, because really all directors loved him. And I know some of them wanted to take his name off the AFI award. Well, good, because it's not supposed to have just one director's name on it. It's for the director it's for. It's not for D.W. Griffith. We're not giving the AFI. I mean, to solve the argument on that one, I had to think, well, we're not giving the award to D.W. Griffith again. And yeah, I can see how an endowment for an award is really cool. even though, like, I'm claiming chair of D.W. Griffith, where I don't think that award needs to be named the D.W. Griffith Award, mainly because if I'm giving an award to Todd Haynes, even if he's got some Griffith in the movie, does he really want to see, like, a competing filmmaker whose films still compete today? I'm doing a class on Griffith, and he's going, well, I guess Griffith's films still compete. You see? And he wouldn't want to get a film, compare himself to the only film that we can think of Griffith really doing, and that's Birth of a Nation, because every time we think of him, we think of that frickin' how racist that film is. And that's the way it should be, because he royally effed it up, but it's a weird movie in a way, because it's kind of blaxploitationist in a real subversive matter. I know that, like, not a lot of African Americans would find value in it, and I don't blame them. It's not a lot of truth. But I got to appreciate, however, the exaggeration of Birth of a Nation goes back to, like, those films on Biograph, where the exaggeration is melodrama, and it's done like in vaudeville. It's done in these broad strokes. You know, at least it's not the Grand Guignol where we're really killing the people that are in it. Like Fouillard was directing at the same time some features in France, but there weren't features, there were serial films that would add up. You do like this weird cartoon later on called Parasite and Barabbas, which I don't even want to watch because I heard it's a terrible film. No, I'm kidding. But then there's Les Vampires, which we saw today on some show. And Les Vampires is the one that really set the standard for lengthy serial films and set the standard for French cinema in general. And I don't think there's been many directors as powerful. T-Men I saw. And T-Men has the one I was telling you about where it has a mirror in the background. But you can see the frame change its digital qualities as you move past the mirror. Like Fouillard knew that, like, if he put a mirror in a certain way, it would reflect back at him in the screen, kind of, but still be like film shadows or something. I don't know how they do that. I don't know if that even worked. It looked like it worked to me, but I was pretty stoned when I watched the 5-hour version of T-Men that isn't even available anymore except on French YouTube. And I thought I had to go after T-Men to find Fouillard, and Fouillard's another one I've really loved and gotten into Le Vampire, and I won't go through Le Vampire except for there were longer takes. And in classical Hollywood cinema, which is invented here by Griffith in Birth of a Nation, and that's what they're talking about at the beginning of film language, it's where you have a shot, match an action. And this is where you get the 180-degree line. Even Great Train Robbery has this, where everything has to be filmed on one side of a fake 180-degree line or everything looks out of context. If you put a camera here and you're shot reverse shotting, then you can go behind the 180 line and shoot from the other side. If it's two people and you're shooting over the shoulders of both of them. You know, they're coming up with this in Birth of a Nation. They're coming up with this in all these films. He's experimenting with it. Biograph and some of the other highlights were, like, for instance, there was a slave in his trust. And a slave in his trust shows this, like, African-American guy that wasn't even in blackface. He was actually a black actor. It was weird how Griffith got away with that and then couldn't in Birth. I don't know. Maybe no black people wanted to do it. It's like the slave and this family escape from a burning cabin, and the slave goes back and saves the daughter of the white family and hands her back. And, like, when he saves that slave girl, I thought, well, this could be, like, seemingly notoriously, like, romantic of the slavery way, so we don't really like it. But I like it because he does a good deed for the white girl, even though he's going back into slavery. That's totally unexpected, not like what we expected to see from the rebel rouser Griffith. And oh, was he a rebel rouser? Yes, indeed he was. All the way to his support of communism. And, you know, one thing that a lot of people don't know about D.W. Griffith is he actually was in the Directors Guild. May have actually helped form it. Like, he helped form USC Film School, which is one of the reasons they wanted a chair. But I certainly wouldn't want to take away anybody else's chances at a chair. And I would offer mine to a Griffith observer like Richard Schickel if he were to ask me to decline for it, because he knows about 10 times as much. So that I'm an expert on the subject doesn't necessarily make me the best author on this subject, because we know that Richard Schickel has done a lot more research in his book, which is somewhere buried in my room. I don't know, my cleaning lady hated everything, but somewhere buried in my room is my D.W. Griffith book by Schickel, and it's one of those notorious film books that everybody has to see once. And his view on Birth of a Nation was, well, Hollywood would go south for a long time, and wasn't it ironically so, because the South wins the war in Birth of a Nation. Or doesn't win, but as they're being destroyed and torn up, the Klan comes in and saves the day, and we're all rooting for the Klan. You know, if you're rooting for the Klan, you already know it's a dated movie, and that the history's dated in it really bad, even more so than the audiences at the time. Oh, sorry, I'm having technical difficulties, class. We're going to have to keep going, but like they've made it like, I think the cleaning lady came in here and booby-trapped my room, I swear, and made things real hard to get to, but we're going to keep trying to run this. Don't give up on me. My lecture position keeps changing, but that's because my cords all got tangled up since yesterday, and it was probably because someone was in my room without me knowing it, or whatever goes on here. I don't know, but I'm just telling you this not to complain, but to welcome to teaching, because all my gear's falling apart. I just dropped a bunch of discs, and now I got to restart.